I was found unconscious on my Air Force dorm room. Nurses and doctors started to sprint into my room, almost in a panic. To the left of me was the hospital monitor, and I watched myself go completely flat. I realized that I was dead. I felt really confused, and I also felt really calm. I was surrounded by light, and I was surrounded by these little beings that didn't look like people. And before I knew it, my body had landed in this incredible garden, like the most beautiful garden you could imagine. I knew I was standing face to face with Jesus. We looked at each other, and I was just getting a wealth of information, and I felt like I had a second chance at life. If you had asked me the night before I died, who would you meet? I really don't think I ever would have thought I would have met Jesus or an angel. It wasn't the Jesus that I grew up in Catholic Church. When you walk into every Catholic church, you see a really skinny, frail man is usually how he's depicted, and that's not what I saw.
The A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast.
I've interviewed over 100 near-death experiencers in the past, but today's guest is really amazing. His story really impressed me, and I think it's one of the most wonderful testimonies I've ever heard. The Air Force veteran, Chase SKYLAR DeMayo. He's here with us. Hello, Chase.
Hello, thank you so much, AJ, for having me on. It's an honor.
So I understand that you flatlined, you went to heaven, you met Jesus, and that you came back with a powerful gift. So can you tell us what happened?
You know, I should have woken up just any normal morning like I had been doing on the Air Force Base in Virginia. I was healthy. I was pretty happy, but I was going through a little bit of a career turmoil in the Air Force at the time. I was previously injured with my knee. So I started to really worry about kind of what my future looked like in the military. And that morning, I was found unconscious on my Air Force dorm room. I was still living on base in Virginia. My supervisor had a key to my dorm room, thankfully, and suspected that I was just late for work and that they were going to kind of catch me, being late and being, I guess, naughty, right? And instead, they found me unconscious, laying on the kitchen floor in my small dorm room, and they transported me to the Air Force hospital there that morning. Like I said, I was super healthy, the night before, no drinking, no drugs. I was a pretty straight and narrow airman, as you would say. I behaved and took good care of myself and my body and my mind. And so there really wasn't a clear indication why I was found unconscious that morning. So of course, the doctors and nurses on base had to run every possible test to figure out what could have happened, right? Was it drinking? Was it drugs? Was it a heart thing? They really didn't know. So they hooked me up. They started doing blood work. They started doing all the types of tests that you would hope some great doctors and nurses on base would do. After a series of time and tests, there really wasn't any indication of why I was found unconscious. And they kind of said, well, maybe it was just like a cardiogenic syncope. So essentially a fainting spell, that maybe I just woke up too quick and stumbled and passed out on my floor. So they said, we'll do one more test. We'll do a mobile chest x-ray, and, we'll just bring it into your room. And if that comes back normal, we'll probably send you home and just kind of say it was just a freak accident. And that's really when my world changed. The nurse fumbled with my arm and started to, walk away from the room and went to go get this mobile chest x-ray machine. And within moments, I don't know how much time passed, but it was very sudden that my eyes started to get really blurry and hazy, something like out of a TV show or a movie where my eyesight was kind of moving left and right, and the room was getting very closed in on me. I guess tunnel vision would be the best example of what it felt like. And at that time, nurses and doctors started to sprint into my room almost in a panic. And I felt obviously really confused, and I also felt really calm. I was unsure why they were sprinting into my room, but of course I'm feeling this weird sensation with my vision and kind of feeling the room getting a little bit tighter, a little bit smaller. And you start having the nurses and doctors start shouting over my body. And they're using medical terms, of course, at the time, 19 years old, didn't know what any of that stuff meant. But at that time, as this panic is happening, it's so weird to describe because things were quiet and loud at the same time. Things were peaceful and chaotic. So it's a really overwhelming feeling that it's hard to kind of share in an interview of all these juxtapositions, all these opposites happening, fast and slow, loud and quiet. But I felt a gentleman sit to the left side of my body and start stroking my left arm. And it was incredibly calm. And even with these alarms blaring and all this noise happening here in the hospital and these nurses and doctors shouting at each other and talking to each other, I can clearly feel and hear this gentleman to the left of me stroking my arm, telling me everything is going to be okay. And it was a wonderful feeling. It was a beautiful feeling. It was exactly what I needed in that moment. And I tried to look over to my left to see who this was. Was it a stranger? Was it a doctor? Was it a nurse? While all these people were shouting over me, this person so calmly to the left of me was telling me everything would be fine. And I loved it. And they told me, be patient. Everything is going to be okay, but you're going to feel a lot of pain traveling up your arm. And in that moment, right as he said that, I started to feel this horrible pain, really excruciating pain go up the inside of my wrist and start traveling all the way up kind of towards, my shoulder, up my arm that direction. And it felt like something 10 times the size that should have been traveling up my arm was traveling up my arm. And it was so slow motion that the calm man to the left of me was just like it felt nice, to have this man stroking my arm, but I wanted to see who it was. And the pain was so bad that I remember my right leg kind of kicking up in the air almost as a reflex of this terrible pain traveling. And when I tried to look over to the left at that time, I felt like I kept being stopped from looking over to my left, like almost like the hand wouldn't let me look. They didn't want me to look over there. And finally, when I could look over to my left and see who was there, I realized there was nobody there at all. There was nobody to the left of me. There was just a kind of a curtain closing off that hospital room that I was staying in. But sure enough, to the left of me was the hospital monitor, and I watched myself go completely flat. And even though I'm not a medical expert, I think everybody knows what that would look like when your hospital monitor that's connected to you completely flatlines. And I realized in that moment that I was dead, that I was either dying or was dead. But either way, that was it for me. And I remember very briefly looking over at the doctors and nurses and seeing the horror or the shock on their face as they look over my body and the confusion on their face of, why did this kid just die in front of us? Did they do enough? I'm sure I'd love to know what they were thinking. I'd love for them to know that I'm okay and I'm sharing this story. If you're out there, I'm not upset. Um, but that was it. I was dead. And that's really when my near-death experience happened. Instead of feeling fear or anger or pain in that moment, what I felt was pure bliss and happiness and joy and this freeing sensation of like ice water being poured on your chest and kind of pouring out of my body. This lightning, if the sunlight could really feel this emotion, it felt this beautiful sensation coming out of my body. And that's when I felt my body traveling upwards. I didn't necessarily see a tunnel, but in the same regard, I was surrounded by light and I was surrounded by these little beings that didn't look like people. I don't know if it looked like angels. It just felt like I was being surrounded by something. And this beautiful sound of like smile and laughter and this just blissfulness of my body traveling upwards. And before I knew it, my body had landed in this incredible garden, like the most beautiful garden you could imagine. Uh, Purple and blue and green and uh, just amazing colors in this garden. and it looked like it just went on forever. It just looked like it was an endless, beautiful, something like you would see in a painting, like in a museum, you know. And what was really noticeable for me was that my feet were firmly planted in dirt. And I don't like to be barefoot. I live here in Orlando, Florida, where if you walk barefoot, you get bit by fire ants, these really nasty red bugs. So growing up, I had never walked barefoot. My parents would not allow it. And so what's different of that is, you know, in a dream, you don't really feel in a dream. Usually when you feel something, it's when you're waking up. And I so vividly remember my feet being in this dirt and my toes having dirt in between them, and realizing that what I was feeling was indeed very real and peaceful. And I didn't really question anything. Looking back, I questioned like, hey, why wasn't I thinking of where am I? What am I doing? And it just everything felt very at peace and very at home and somewhat familiar for me. But way up in the distance, way ahead of me, I could see this gentleman in a robe and a little boy in a robe, and they were so far ahead of me. And without me having to walk, I would say without me floating or thinking that I was flying or anything like that, before I knew it, I was right on top of these two people. The gentleman in the robe had to have been in his 30s, you know, dark hair, dark curly hair, and piercing green eyes. And he was just had this really calm, beautiful presence about him. And he had his hands behind his back and was just very relaxed. And this little boy was probably 3 or 4 years old, little blonde hair, curly haired, and was just having the time of his life and was being playful and was just being silly and goofy and cheeky and was kind of walking ahead, thinking that he was running away from this man, you know, like how little kids think that they're running away, but really they're not. And he was giggling, and the gentleman was giggling, and they were just having this really beautiful connection, almost like a father-son connection where, you know, everything was okay, everything was calm, but just a nice moment. And so I'm just sitting there observing this and watching this and just thinking, gosh, this is really nice. You know, this is really, really peaceful. And I love watching these two interact. And before I knew it, the gentleman really turned to me and looked right at me. And instantly, I knew it was Jesus. And that's really surprising to me because if you had asked me the night before I died, who would you meet? I really don't think I ever would have thought I would have met Jesus or an angel. Maybe I would have met my grandfather or a relative or, um, you know, some sort of guardian angel, if you will. But I was so certain instantly that I was looking directly at Jesus. And, uh, you know, it wasn't the Jesus that I grew up in Catholic Church seeing. You know, in Catholic Church, when you walk into every Catholic church, you see usually a really skinny, frail man suffering on a cross, usually in obviously the worst moment of Jesus's life, is usually how he's depicted in Catholic Church, and that's not what I saw. But I was so certain, just like I would look at myself in the mirror and know that it's me. I knew I was standing face to face with Jesus, and I was so happy to see him. And you know, we just looked at each other, and I was shocked. And so much went through my mind at that time was, oh my gosh, you know, I'm standing face to face with Jesus. Why do I deserve to stand face to face with Jesus? What am I doing here? You know, all of those things start coming up of, um, is this really it? You know, is this really happening? Am I really dead now? And where is this heaven? You know, is this did I thought maybe heaven would be like floating in clouds. I didn't picture where I was standing and what was happening. And the lesson became really clear, really fast to me as I watched this little boy. Because once I realized it was Jesus, I looked over at the little boy and I realized it was me. And I used to, at that age, have curly blonde hair, which now, of course, it's dark and short. And um, it was really surprising for me. It was really this overwhelming sensation of I'm staring at myself as a little boy, and here's Jesus in a garden, and they're playing with each other and they're having fun. And this was at a moment of my life before I died that I was taking life really seriously. Everything was really overwhelming. Everything was really intense back on Earth, I would say, in my body. Um, that obviously, um, it was beautiful. It was like playing out like a TV show or a movie that was like right in front of me. This really happy person, um, carefree, stress-free, burden-free, gravity-free, and surrounded by love. And it was awesome.
What did he say when you talked, and how did it affect you?
Yeah, so what was really cool was we exchanged all this information, I feel like. And I wouldn't call it a download, but I guess maybe for the lack of a better term, I felt like I was just getting a wealth of information, almost like a reminder of these are all things that you already should know, and these are all things that maybe you've forgotten. And what always really stood out was towards the end of our conversation was that he wanted me to go back and spread light, love, joy, and laughter. And I remember the laughter part because I feel like growing up, you always hear about, oh, spread light and spread love and spread joy. But laughter is just one of those words that really stood out in my heart and in my mind. Because what's better, right, than making somebody laugh or hearing somebody laugh, whether it's a stranger or a loved one? So I remember taking that like piece of that statement of go back and spread laughter. And before I could even really reiterate or ask any more questions during this kind of this time, he said, you know, it's time to go back now. And he said it with this big smile on his face, almost like you know better. You know, there was never a question, am I going to stay in heaven? It's like he knew, and I was supposed to know that this was just this very brief moment or reminder of what, you know, I needed to do. So I smiled back and I said, okay, yeah, I know. And I took one last look at him, last look at this little boy that I was sure was me. And before I knew it, I had woken up right back in my body in Virginia. Except the plot twist for me was I wasn't in my original hospital room. I realized very quickly that I was off base. I was no longer on the military base, that my body had been transported to a civilian hospital for me to be pronounced dead, which was really interesting for me. I wasn't hooked up to any cords at that time or any more medical equipment. So it was clear that when they had transported my, you know, I assume lifeless body off base, that I was just kind of being held in a room until they figured out what to do. And that was a surreal moment because you open up your eyes and you have this incredibly vivid and profound experience, and you don't want it to end. You want to close your eyes again and you're like, please take me back there. That was, you know, that was such a nice feeling. But the reality was I was back in this heavy body experiencing, you know, all these emotions now. I have pain in my arm, of course. I start to realize and kind of replay not only what happened in heaven, but also what happened in the hospital room. Did I die? Who was to the left of me? Where are those nurses and doctors? There was just a lot of questions and a lot of confusion. And I think at that time in my life, that confusion and a lot of questions turned into shame pretty quickly, which was unfortunate that I just had this beautiful experience. And I think the first emotion that really came over me was embarrassment. You know, did I just die? Who should I tell? Who's going to believe me? People are going to think I'm crazy. You know, if I go back to the Air Force Base and go back to my friends and say I just met Jesus, you know, how are people going to look at me? How am I going to be treated? And what's so important too about my story is in the military, often any sort of mental health or physical health is grounds to be kicked out of the military, right? The military is strict to get into for a good reason. You know, we are supposed to be mentally and physically equipped to go fight in wars or, you know, protect others. So I always say, you know, if you have asthma, if you have flat feet, if you have depression, like all of these different things that would either require some sort of physical intervention or mental intervention, usually you're not fit for the military. So I didn't want to leave the military. I wanted to be in the military my whole life. So it very quickly became, I need to keep this a secret. I did tell friends and I did post on Facebook like any 19-year-old would do. Back in 2008, I posted on Facebook a photo of me with all my hospital wristbands still on. And I said, this was the night I practically died, I think were my exact words. And I just turned it into a joke. I told my friends I died and I'm here and let's go get some food. And I just tried to brush it off as uh, probably any 19-year-old at the time I assume would do, especially in my circumstance of being in the military. So I kept those changes and kind of that beautiful experience to myself. And I felt like I had a second chance at life. And luckily I was mature enough to go back and go, what is everything felt like I missed out in my childhood? What were all the things that I thought looked fun or entertaining or interesting? And what can I go back and do? So, I found myself interested in photography. So I got a nice camera and learned how to become a photographer. And I thought breakdancing was interesting, growing up watching people breakdance. And I certainly was not a dancer growing up or a performer, but I joined a local club and started breakdancing. And I thought ballroom dancing was awesome. And so I started doing lessons and became a certified instructor, took the test and everything. Friends in high school said, "Oh, you should be a stand-up comedian," and I was like, "Yeah, whatever." But sure enough, I went back and I started taking comedy classes and how to write comedy jokes, and I got to headline a comedy club. I did all these things, I say selfishly, at the time because I knew I had this beautiful message and an opportunity to come back and relive and not take life so seriously. But I didn't share that message with anybody else. That's why I say it was selfish. Um, I was so afraid of the judgment that would come with saying I not only died and came back, felt like people would roll their eyes about that, and then the seriousness of saying that I met Jesus. I knew that people would ridicule that, would question that. Not only maybe people who are non-believers in religion or Christianity, but even Christians might question, why does this goofy kid Chase get to meet Jesus and I don't, and um, those kind of thoughts, those negative thoughts would really swirl my mind for a long time of when is the right time to share my story? Who is the right person to share my story with? So I started to share it slowly. I would share it with friends, with my family, of course, knew what had happened to me, and I felt comfortable that they knew me well enough to not judge me. Um, but I would quite literally look into the sky and kind of shout to myself of like, what did you give me a second chance for? Why am I here? What do you want me to do with this gift? And I was so focused on looking up in the sky for a message that I lost sight of kind of looking around me day to day and realized that I was able to make people laugh and make people feel good while I was, living here on Earth. Um, but I allowed that self-doubt really to take over and feel like maybe I wasn't doing enough, that I wasn't doing enough of the message that I got in heaven. Um, so I kind of sunk into a little hole again, and started taking life really seriously. I felt like I needed to get a grown-up job, which is it's a curse word, right? Saying let me get a serious job, and stop trying to make people laugh. At the time, I was performing for theme parks and I was working on cruise ships and I was getting to entertain thousands of people every day. And for some reason, I thought that wasn't good enough, which is such a shame, of course. And so I got this grown-up job and thought, this is my opportunity to really, become a man and sit in an office all day and be miserable, right? So, I went through a tough period of, all of a sudden now I'm fulfilling paying bills, but am I happy elsewhere? Am I doing enough for others elsewhere? Am I sharing the message that I got from heaven? And I was really fortunate. I got to go on this military veteran wellness program. It was a 5-day retreat where we did things like yoga, which I had never really done before, breath work, which I had definitely never done before, meditation, which I thought was so beyond me. I didn't believe in meditating or really know what it was. Um, I had all these preconceived notions of spirituality that was like, that's not for me. But I went into this 5-day retreat and really gave it a chance. I really believed in, I'm going to disconnect, turn off my phone for these 5 days. And I bought in. I bought into the process of allowing myself to relax and kind of look at my life again. And by the end of that 5 days, it ended on a Friday. I felt like I was a completely different person. Changed in so many different ways. Whereas when I came home from that retreat, I drove home a couple hours and my wife said, not only you're a different person, you look different, you're acting different. Um, because I bought in and like I said, I trusted this process of allowing myself to escape and look at who I was and kind of zoom out also of this life that I was taking so serious and reconnect with, hey, I went to heaven and I got this message to spread light, love, and joy and laughter. And here I am, like taking life so seriously. Like, what am I doing? It was kind of like a hit on the head. And luckily, this time I didn't have to die to get a positive message. I listened to everything around me and I'm grateful for that. So came back and within a couple of days, it was like turning on the on sign, the open sign of a restaurant, and allowing all this stuff to come in, all these customers, and not being able to turn the off sign, turn the close sign on. So I started getting all these emotions, all these messages, and finding out that I had gifts that I had really pushed aside that my wife knew about, and certain family members knew that I felt like maybe I had some sort of gift, but I didn't know what to call it. And I also thought I quite honestly, I thought it would make me sound crazy. So I was like, I'm not going to share this with anybody. But, for my wife and I, it was almost like a party trick. I would say, hey, you need to go get the mail today because this is getting delivered. This is really important for us. And she'd be like, how do you know? And I'm like, just trust me. Or I would say, you need to go check on this friend. They're going through really, really tough time. You need to check in on them. She's like, yeah, text them. And I'm like, no, 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 they're, and she would reach out. And sure enough, they were in a dark place. Like, so there were all these instances, um, I'd say unexplainable instances of things that I started to know and really hone in on. But I didn't, like I said, I didn't know what to call it. I was afraid to call it anything because I feel like once you label something, it becomes very true. But once I got back from that retreat, it was really hard to hide. Um, I found out that I had a half sister within 2 days of coming back from the retreat that I'd never known about my whole life. I ended up finding a missing girl who was missing online on Facebook. Um, I was very certain of what happened to her and where she was, which was unexplainable for me and confusing. And you go through this weird mental thing of should I be proud that I know or really upset, obviously, of what happened to this young girl. So I didn't really know what to do with my thoughts. I didn't really know what to do with this gift that I had really went from like, I kind of lit fire on the gas, so to speak, and it was hard to turn off or hard to extinguish. Um, so really quickly, I found out about the term near-death experience. I found out about this organization called IANDS, which is the International Association of Near-Death Studies, and that there was an entire veteran community within IANDS that was life-changing for me. I mean, I cried so much within like a 4 day period of getting home from that retreat to finding out about these gifts that I had really pushed down for so long. I always say it's kind of like a beach ball when you're a kid and you're in the pool or in the ocean and you try to hold a ball underwater and you could think you're as strong as you want, but eventually when you let go of that ball, it comes shooting up into the air. Um, and it was just overwhelming for me.
Did you ever have communication with Jesus? Did you ever see him again?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I did, and it unmistakably was it him. And I had tried to after this retreat and really trying to focus more on my gifts and really come to terms with kind of this new life that I was going to have. I often would meditate and kind of hope that I got to see Jesus again, and it didn't happen. And I realized when you force something, especially meditation, that in my opinion, the point of meditation is to not force anything or ask for anything and just allow it to come to you. But I so vividly remember one time I was on an airplane flight and I kind of joke I must have just been closer to heaven. My frequency must have been stronger. I think it was just because it was complete silence on the plane and I was in a really calm state. And all of a sudden, I just felt this presence immediately come over me and I knew it was Jesus again. And I wasn't shocked and I didn't freak out. I wasn't like meeting my like a big celebrity. I wasn't like, woo, yeah, he's back. Um, we just had this incredibly beautiful conversation because it had been years. And it was exactly what I needed, I think, in that moment, because it was reassurance of who I really am, what my gifts really are, and that I am on the right page and the right path sharing this because I had kept it secret for so long. I think that was my biggest question for myself was, am I doing the right thing by sharing this? You open yourself up to a lot of scrutiny. And what really stood out for me was this very like fun, lighthearted conversation. And I remember asking him about the cross. And I said, the cross is how everybody here on earth remembers you. That's kind of the symbol of you at your worst moment, right? Um, and I said, is that kind of how you would want to remembered? And it was so profound to me that it's something that will stick with me every day. I think about it every day. He said, really, I'd like to be remembered as the sun. And I said, the sun, like sun. And he said, yes, because even when you can't see me, I'm still there and giving you life. And I thought, whoa, like I wanted to fall back in my seat, but it was an airplane seat, right? So it wasn't going anywhere. And I was like, wow, like you want to be remembered as the sun. And then when I shared that story, when I got back on land, people were like, the sun, the son of God. And I was like, whoa, like this is like amazing. And it was just beautiful. And it was really a funny conversation. Like it was almost like talking to a friend where you could ask the friend, kind of give them a hard time about something like, oh, how do you feel about this? And it was so beautiful. And that was the last time that I know for certain that I've communicated with him. And this is, we're filming this in summer 2025 right now. This was probably about 3 years ago. And it was just what I needed, though. I don't expect to ever speak to Jesus, of course. Like, who am I? I'm just a kid from Orlando. I'm nothing special. But I think it's what I needed again in that moment because I had really projected this, very quickly kind of embraced this new world of near-death studies. And I started going to school for alternative medicine and I started trying to understand other religions in the world and really like make myself more open to spirituality. And I think it's exactly what I needed to let me know that I was doing okay. And the things that I was doing were, um, I guess, had his approval, for the lack of a better term.
Did he mention that if helping others affected you or something?
Yeah, so it's really important for me. So I realized that with these gifts that I had the ability to not only feel other people's pain if I put myself in that position, but I also, whether I practiced it or it came naturally or not, that I was able with my hands, was able to help people, which is really hard when you're trying to live a normal human experience here on Earth, with a family, a wife, and a son. And my grandmother, I realized that it was something that I was capable of doing because a wooden pallet had fallen on my grandmother's shoulder and it should have broken her shoulder. She fell over. I was standing right there. I take some of the blame because gosh, I wish I could have caught the pallet before it fell on her. Um, and I scooped her up. I carried her into her room, and my hand never left her shoulder. And I left it on there, and she's like, "Your hand's getting really hot," and it got really intense for the both of us. And eventually, I pulled my hand off, and there was not even a bruise, a scrape, a break. I mean, we can say some people that are skeptical, gosh, I wish I was skeptical too, that, it was just, meant to be and it wasn't really going to hurt her shoulder. But within that same time period, I started feeling other people's pain too and started trying to take that pain on my own. And so during my conversation with Jesus before we kind of started joking, he told me very vividly that I have to stop trying to take other people's pain, because I felt like I could just walk around and if I saw somebody suffering, that I could just, hey, let me take your pain. But a lot of times I would feel that pain too. And that became really hard, to the point where one morning, or afternoonish, actually, my wife found me kind of curled up in the middle of the living room floor. Um, and she was really concerned for me, like really nervous. And she's like, you can't keep doing this. And I would just try to, like, when I would go to sleep every night, I would set an intention, as I would say, and say, I want to help as many people as I possibly can in my sleep. And I was waking up sore, I was waking up sad, depressed, and these weren't my own pains or my own depression. I was trying to help people, and people would message me and go, "Gosh, so weird. I haven't thought of you in years, and you popped up in my dreams." And I would laugh and be like, "Yeah, I'm sure I did." And it became kind of this, this fun exercise for me to almost practice, but it started taking a toll on me. I still had a regular job during the day, and I was like, I can't wake up suffering every day. And my wife was like, you can't do this. So in this conversation with Jesus, he was like, you can't take everybody's pain. You have to let other people live their human experience. And that's tough for me because I have a son. So how do I handle that for my son? If my son hits his head and he starts crying, is it, dad mode and just protect him and hold him like a baby and kiss his forehead, tell him it's magic kisses, or do I really try to heal him? Um, and that's hard for me. That's hard for me to this day, with my son. If he hurts himself, I know he's just got to be a regular little boy and he's got to feel bumps and bruises and hit his head on stuff like I always did. And when do I intervene? When I see somebody suffering out in public, at what point do I jump in and put my hands over them, or do I pray for them, in silence? Do I go home and think about them and see if I can do anything for them? It's something that I still struggle with to this day because it's like a gift that you know that you have, but you don't know when to use it, how to use it, or if you should even use it. Um, but I'm glad that he told me that because I think if he had not told me that, I don't know if I would still be around. I don't know how much pain I would have endured before I would have had to stop, whether by choice or not.
Are you still Catholic? How did your religious beliefs change after your experience?
My religious beliefs changed greatly, right? I would absolutely consider myself deeply Christian. I was raised in a Catholic household. My family, we went to church on Sundays, and that was kind of it. That would kind of be the end of the deal for the week. Once every 7 days, we would go to church. We didn't really talk about it throughout the week. I got my, baptism when I was young. I went through confirmation, if you're familiar with Catholic religion, but that was really just, it was kind of like a family thing that we did. It wasn't something where we prayed over our food or we quoted scripture throughout our days. It was just kind of just a part of our normal livelihood, I guess you can say. So had you asked me the night before, what happened to me or what could have happened to me if I died, I really didn't think about death. Especially, I think young in the military, that's the last thing you should really be thinking of is death or what happens after you die. I didn't know the term near-death experience. I didn't know what heaven would be like. I didn't ever imagine if I met Jesus, if I deserved to go to heaven, if I went to hell. I mean, these were conversations that just at no point, 0% of my life did I ever really consider. So that day, April 1st, 2008, I kind of just was in my own little naive or ignorant world of, if I die, I die, it happens, whatever. Which is why I think my story was so profound and my experience was so profound and surprising to me because not anything I expected to happen would happen. I always say that I became deeply more spiritual and maybe a little bit less religious. And what that means, at least in my mind, is I became so open to just accepting everybody and realizing that everybody is capable of love and needs love. And it doesn't matter what necessarily somebody labels themselves as. Um, so as I've been going, I'm in school to get my doctorate, and it's in holistic counseling, and I've done so much research since this kind of this new exploration of spirituality on other religions and what the afterlife means for Baha'i and Hinduism and the Jewish community and Buddhism and I could keep going. But I've been so curious of how we are all connected. So I would identify myself as Christian, absolutely. But I also feel myself more open than I've ever been to just finding love and peace and joy for everybody, no matter where they are in their religious or spiritual journey. What's really cool about getting to do interviews and share my story is that I get emails from atheists often, from skeptics. And I always say, I love a skeptic. Cynics are hard, right? If you're a cynic, and you're just looking to be angry and to say no to everything, then my story is probably not for you. But I really do get a good amount of emails from atheists, and they're always incredibly positive and reassuring. And they'll say, I really like this part of your story. This part is hard for me to get over, but I like the way you worded it. And that to me is incredible, because when I share my story, I'm not trying to share, you got to be a Christian or you're going to heaven, or, that's not the purpose of my story. My entire near-death experience was this feeling of love and joy and happiness, and a reminder to spread that here on earth. And so while my experience was essentially Christian because I did meet Jesus, the experience was not Christian in the sense of I'm only supposed to spread it to Christians. My story is not exclusive, I should say. My son got baptized on when he turned 11 days old, which was important because my wife's family is from Australia, so they were in town for his birth. And before they left, I thought it would be really nice. It'd be a really great thing because his godmother is in Australia, his aunt, right? So I wanted him to get baptized, and I will raise him Christian, and of course allow space for him to believe whatever he wants to believe. But for me, I always use the term, which makes some people turn their head to the side.
If someone wants to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, so the easiest way, I post these little 60-second videos every couple of days on Instagram. Because my degrees are in alternative medicine and metaphysical sciences, I love the blend of spirituality and science, because a lot of people find a hard time connecting the two. So I post these videos, and my Instagram handle is at Chase Skylar, so ChaseSkylar. That's a great way to just follow me and interact, and I try to check all my messages as often as possible. I also have a website where you can find all my social media and information, and that's just my first and last name .com. So chasedemayo.com, and so easy to find me there. And then I get to speak at conferences. So if you're ever in town at any of those conferences, I'd absolutely love to give you a hug and meet you and interact and answer questions, because in my heart, I have a full-time job where I work in sports. For me, this is such a great way to hopefully just resonate with the right people at the right time, and hopefully give people a little bit of hope. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Janet Riley, and I'm the Executive Director of the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And I am thrilled to invite you to join us at our annual conference, August 27th to the 31st in Oak Brook, Illinois, just outside Chicago, where we will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the field of near-death studies. Join us for 4 inspiring days with more than 100 speakers, including the legendary Life After Life author Raymond Moody, University of Virginia Professor Emeritus Dr. Bruce Grayson, Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell of the Telepathy Tapes, the psychic lawyer Mark Anthony, and spiritual teacher Carolyn Mace, among others. You'll experience healing workshops, including meditation, Reiki, spiritual counseling, and our beloved bookstore with exclusive book signings, surrounded by others who share your interests and your experiences. Come make friends and become part of a warm, caring community that will beckon you to return. Every year, we welcome nearly 1,000 attendees and serve over 20,000 globally through educational resources and support groups. This warm, deeply connected community celebrates life and the life that follows. For nearly 50 years, IANDS has represented researchers who study near-death experiences and supported those who have had near-death experiences and experienced related phenomena. Our mission is to educate the world. Our hope is that by supporting research and people, and by communicating far and wide to reporters, podcasters, and through our website and social media, we can normalize discussions about death and the afterlife and help answer the very important question: what happens when we die? Our planet faces unprecedented challenges, and our conference offers a place to recharge, to be informed, to be healed and inspired. Register now at IANDS.org, that's IANDS.org, and become part of a gathering that informs, heals, and inspires. We hope to see you there.
This has been the AJ Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.